Sometimes the most dangerous mistake is not breaking the law, but believing you already know who deserves its protection. The first rays of a cool Tuesday morning spread across the quiet streets of Alexandria, Virginia, as commuters filled the roads with the familiar rhythm of another ordinary workday. Naomi Whitaker drove a dark gray sedan at a steady speed, one hand resting lightly on the steering wheel while soft classical music played through the speakers. At 47 years old, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who never needed to announce her importance. Her close-cropped natural hair framed a composed face, and a navy blazer rested neatly over a cream blouse, giving her the appearance of any professional heading toward an early meeting. Nothing about her invited attention, and that was exactly how she preferred it. Behind her, flashing red and blue lights suddenly reflected across the rearview mirror. Naomi calmly checked her speed before signaling and pulling onto the shoulder with practiced precision. She lowered the driver's side window, placed both hands where they could easily be seen, and waited patiently. Officer Brandon Keller stepped out of his patrol vehicle with long, confident strides. At 34 years old, he looked every bit the image of a modern patrol officer. Tall, athletic, clean-cut, and wearing a perfectly pressed uniform, he approached the sedan with the certainty of someone who believed experience had taught him everything he needed to know about people. One quick glance through the open window was all it took for assumptions to begin replacing observation. "License and registration," he said flatly. Naomi met his eyes without hostility. "Of course, officer." She retrieved her wallet slowly, removed her driver's license, and handed it to him along with the vehicle registration. Brandon looked down at the license for only a second before his expression hardened. He looked back at Naomi, then again at the identification card, as though something about the information irritated him. "Step out of the vehicle." Naomi remained calm. "May I ask why?" "I asked you to step out." His tone grew noticeably sharper. Without argument, Naomi opened the door and stood beside her vehicle, keeping her hands visible. A delivery driver passing by slowed briefly before continuing down the road, while another commuter glanced toward the traffic stop with quiet curiosity. Brandon held the license between two fingers, staring at it with visible skepticism. "You expect me to believe this belongs to you?" Naomi answered evenly. "It is my valid driver's license." Brandon gave a short laugh that carried more judgment than humor. "People try all kinds of things." Naomi neither protested nor raised her voice. She simply watched him with the same calm expression she had maintained from the beginning. That composure seemed only to frustrate him further. Without making any effort to verify the information through his patrol computer, Brandon bent the plastic card sharply between his fingers. The license cracked with a faint snap before he tore it completely in half and let the pieces fall toward the pavement. A nearby pedestrian stopped walking, stunned by what had just happened. Naomi lowered her eyes briefly to the broken pieces before looking back at the officer. There was disappointment in her expression, but not fear. "Officer," she said quietly, "are you certain you want today's decisions to become permanent?" Brandon dismissed the question with a confident smirk. "Save that speech for someone who believes it." He reached for his radio and requested transport procedures, convinced he had complete control of the situation. Naomi remained silent, watching as the wind carried one piece of her driver's license a few feet across the shoulder. Less than 30 seconds later, Brandon's patrol radio crackled unexpectedly. Dispatch sounded unusually cautious. "Unit 12, before you proceed any further, we need you to verify the full name on that driver's license one more time." Brandon Keller glanced at the broken pieces of the driver's license scattered across the pavement before lifting the radio microphone to his shoulder. "The name is Naomi Whitaker," he answered without looking at her. A brief pause followed. Then dispatch responded again, slower this time. "Unit 12, please verify." "The spelling." Brandon frowned. "Why? I already gave you the name." The dispatcher hesitated for a moment. "Our system is requesting a secondary confirmation." Brandon rolled his eyes and repeated each letter with growing impatience. Naomi stood quietly beside her sedan, the cool morning breeze gently moving the edge of her blazer. She neither interrupted nor attempted to explain anything. The passing traffic continued as though nothing unusual had happened, yet several drivers slowed just enough to notice the patrol car parked along the shoulder. One woman walking her dog stopped across the street and watched from a respectful distance. Brandon returned the radio to his shoulder clip with visible annoyance. "Happy now," he muttered. The dispatcher simply replied, "Stand by." Those two words lingered in the air longer than either of them expected. Brandon looked toward Naomi again. "You are coming with me until we sort this out." Naomi answered calmly, "Officer, I have cooperated with every instruction you have given." "Good. Keep doing that." She offered a slight nod. "I intend to." There was no fear in her voice, no anger, and no attempt to challenge his authority. That unusual calm unsettled Brandon more than an argument would have. Most traffic stops followed familiar patterns. People complained. They defended themselves. They became emotional. Naomi had done none of those things. Instead, she watched him with quiet patience, almost as though she believed time itself would eventually answer every question. A tow truck passed slowly before continuing down the highway. The driver glanced toward the shoulder, noticing the broken plastic lying near the front tire of Naomi's sedan. Meanwhile, several miles away, inside the administrative offices of the United States District Court, a judicial assistant looked at the conference room clock with growing concern. Judge Naomi Whitaker had never arrived late for a scheduled hearing. She reached for the telephone and attempted to call the judge's secure mobile number. The call continued ringing without an answer. Assuming it might simply be a delayed commute, she tried again several minutes later with the same result. She quietly informed the court security director, Evelyn Brooks, that something felt unusual. Evelyn listened carefully before requesting that courthouse security verify whether Judge Whitaker had entered the building through another entrance. Within minutes, every normal point of arrival had been checked. There was still no sign of her. Back on the roadside, Brandon completed several entries on his electronic tablet before opening the rear passenger door of his patrol vehicle. "You may sit in the back while we continue this investigation." Naomi looked briefly at the broken driver's license still resting on the pavement. "May I retrieve what remains of my identification?" Brandon shook his head. "That will not be necessary." Without another word, Naomi entered the patrol vehicle exactly as instructed. She sat upright with remarkable composure, folding her hands neatly in her lap while looking out the window at the morning sky. Brandon closed the door and returned to the driver's seat. As he started the engine, the patrol computer suddenly emitted a soft notification tone. A new message appeared across the screen. Instead of the routine confirmation he expected, the display showed only one unusual instruction from dispatch. "Do not transport until supervisory confirmation is completed." Brandon stared at the message in disbelief, and before he could respond, another incoming call appeared, this time from Sergeant Linda Mercer herself. Sergeant Linda Mercer's name flashing across the patrol computer caught Brandon Keller completely off guard. She rarely called officers directly during routine traffic stops unless something required immediate attention. Brandon accepted the call, trying to sound confident. "Officer Keller." Linda's voice remained calm but unusually deliberate. "Do not move your vehicle yet. I need to ask you a few questions." Brandon glanced into the rear passenger compartment where Naomi Whitaker sat quietly looking through the window at the passing traffic. "Sergeant, this is a simple detention. Dispatch is making it more complicated than it needs to be." Linda ignored the comment. "Tell me exactly what happened from the moment you initiated the stop." Brandon summarized the encounter, describing Naomi's cooperation but emphasizing his doubts about her identification. He briefly mentioned tearing the driver's license after deciding it appeared suspicious. The silence that followed lasted several seconds. When Linda finally spoke again, her tone had become noticeably firmer. "Did you verify the identification through the patrol computer before destroying it?" Brandon hesitated for the first time that morning. "No, I intended to do that afterward." Linda answered carefully. "Officer, procedure exists for a reason." Brandon looked toward the rearview mirror. Naomi remained composed, her hands still folded neatly in her lap. She was not listening with anger. She simply appeared patient, almost as though she already understood where the conversation was heading. Across the city, Court Security Director Evelyn Brooks stood inside the Security Operations Center reviewing access records with increasing concern. Every scheduled hearing that morning depended upon Judge Naomi Whitaker's arrival, yet her official vehicle had never entered the courthouse parking structure. Evelyn contacted the United States Marshals Service liaison assigned to federal judicial protection, explaining that the judge had unexpectedly missed multiple secure check-ins. Although no emergency had been declared, the missed communications were enough to initiate a verification process. Within minutes, a Marshals supervisor requested the judge's last known travel route and estimated arrival time. Meanwhile, dispatch completed another database inquiry using the spelling Brandon had reluctantly confirmed. Instead of returning an ordinary driver's record, the search produced an access restriction requiring supervisory authorization before additional information could be displayed. The dispatcher immediately forwarded the notification to Sergeant Mercer without releasing the restricted details over the radio. Linda read the alert twice before quietly asking dispatch to maintain the traffic stop until she arrived. Back beside the highway, Brandon grew increasingly frustrated. "Sergeant, with respect, we are wasting time," Linda responded. Evenly. "Sometimes slowing down prevents much larger problems." Brandon ended the call after acknowledging her instructions. He stepped out of the patrol vehicle and walked several feet away, attempting another manual search through his tablet. The system accepted Naomi's name, then paused unusually long before displaying a secure notification. "Access restricted. Contact supervisory authority." Brandon frowned and attempted the search again with identical results. "This system has to be malfunctioning," he muttered under his breath. Naomi quietly watched him through the rear passenger window without saying a word. Her expression remained steady, neither satisfied nor afraid. A few moments later, another patrol unit arrived. Sergeant Linda Mercer stepped out, carrying the calm confidence earned through nearly 3 decades of law enforcement experience. She greeted Brandon with a brief nod before walking directly toward the patrol vehicle. Through the glass, Naomi and Linda made eye contact for only an instant. Something in the judge's composed expression caused Linda to pause before she spoke. Then her own department radio suddenly transmitted an unexpected priority message from dispatch. "Sergeant Mercer, we have received an inquiry from the United States District Court requesting immediate assistance in locating an individual named Naomi Whitaker." The request from dispatch changed the atmosphere beside the highway almost instantly. Sergeant Linda Mercer acknowledged the transmission without taking her eyes off Naomi Whitaker. Dispatch confirmed the requesting agency. The answer came back immediately. United States District Court Security Operations. They report that the individual failed to arrive for a scheduled federal proceeding and has not responded to multiple secure communications. Brandon Keller folded his arms, refusing to let uncertainty replace the confidence he had carried all morning. "That does not prove anything. Plenty of people miss appointments." Linda answered quietly. "No, but it explains why I am asking more questions." She approached the rear passenger door and opened it. Naomi stepped out calmly after receiving a polite invitation to do so. Her expression remained composed despite everything that had happened. Linda spoke in an even tone. "Ma'am, I understand this has been an unusual morning. Is there anything you would like to tell me before we continue?" Naomi looked at both officers for a brief moment before answering. "Sergeant, I have cooperated with every lawful instruction I have been given. I requested only one thing: verification before assumptions." Linda nodded thoughtfully. "That request should have been documented." Brandon immediately responded. "Sergeant, she is avoiding direct answers." Naomi met his eyes without raising her voice. "I have answered every question truthfully." The quiet confidence in her words seemed to settle over the roadside more heavily than any argument could have. Across town, Court Security Director Evelyn Brooks stood beside the United States Marshals Service liaison as additional notifications appeared across a secure operations monitor. Judge Whitaker's official court calendar had now been delayed. Attorneys were waiting inside the courtroom, and a senior clerk had confirmed that the judge's secure authentication had not been completed that morning. Although there was still no indication of criminal activity, established judicial protection procedures required immediate location verification whenever a federal judge unexpectedly disappeared from scheduled duties. Deputy United States Marshal Daniel Ruiz reviewed the preliminary information before calmly requesting all available vehicle registration data connected to Judge Whitaker. Several seconds later, the registration number matched a vehicle currently associated with an active law enforcement contact. Daniel looked up. "Locate the responding agency immediately." Back beside the highway, Linda requested permission from Naomi to confirm additional identifying information verbally. Naomi agreed without hesitation, answering each question clearly and consistently. Every response matched the limited information dispatch was authorized to release. Linda noticed something else as well. Naomi never once mentioned her profession. She neither attempted to influence the encounter nor suggested that anyone would face consequences. That restraint spoke volumes. Brandon remained unconvinced. People memorize information all the time. Linda turned toward him. That is why we verify facts instead of relying on impressions. Before Brandon could answer, his patrol computer emitted another notification. This time the screen did not display an error. Instead, a secure message instructed that all further database access concerning Naomi Whitaker required direct supervisory credentials. Linda carefully entered her authorization code. The system processed the request for several long seconds before the screen suddenly locked again. One sentence appeared across the display in bold letters. Federal Judicial Security Record. Authorized personnel only. Contact United States Marshals Service. Brandon stared silently at the message as the confidence slowly faded from his face. At that exact moment, dispatch transmitted another update. Sergeant Mercer, be advised that a Deputy United States Marshal is en route to your location with an estimated arrival time of 6 minutes. They requested that the individual remain exactly where she is until they arrive. The 6 minutes felt much longer than they should have. Morning traffic continued flowing past the shoulder of the highway. Yet the atmosphere around the patrol vehicles had become strangely still. Sergeant Linda Mercer stood beside Naomi Whitaker, maintaining a respectful distance while quietly reviewing the limited information available on her tablet. Every secure inquiry ended exactly the same way. Access restricted. Contact the United States Marshals Service. Brandon Keller paced a few steps away, unwilling to admit that the situation had slipped beyond his understanding. This cannot be right, he said under his breath. People do not trigger federal security alerts during ordinary traffic stops. Linda looked at him calmly. That is exactly why we stopped making assumptions several minutes ago. Naomi remained composed. She folded her hands in front of her and watched a light breeze carry leaves across the edge of the roadway. She showed no satisfaction, no resentment, and no attempt to lecture anyone. Her silence was not weakness. It was discipline developed over many years of choosing patience before emotion. A few motorists slowed as they passed, noticing the growing number of law enforcement vehicles parked along the shoulder. One driver who had witnessed the beginning of the stop quietly saved the video, recording on a mobile phone before continuing toward work. Several miles away, Deputy United States Marshal Daniel Ruiz guided an unmarked government sport utility vehicle toward the location transmitted by court security. Beside him sat Court Security Director Evelyn Brooks, who had personally chosen to accompany him after confirming that Judge Whitaker had still not arrived at the courthouse. Neither of them discussed blame. Their only concern was confirming the judge's safety and understanding why routine judicial communications had suddenly stopped. As the vehicle exited the highway, Daniel received one final update through the secure radio channel. The local supervisor has maintained the scene. The individual remains cooperative. Daniel nodded. Good. Let us keep it that way. Back at the roadside, Linda approached Naomi once again. Ma'am, I appreciate your patience. I understand this has likely been frustrating. Naomi offered a small, understanding smile. Sergeant, every professional eventually faces a moment that tests whether procedure matters more than assumption. Linda quietly absorbed those words. Brandon, however, remained defensive. She keeps talking in riddles. Naomi turned toward him for the first time since leaving the patrol vehicle. No, officer. I am simply answering with the same respect I hoped to receive. Those words lingered in the morning air. Brandon looked away without replying. Moments later, the sound of another approaching vehicle drew everyone's attention. A dark government sport utility vehicle entered the shoulder behind the patrol cars. Daniel Ruiz stepped out first, dressed in a dark business suit with a visible federal credentials holder clipped to his belt. Evelyn Brooks followed close behind, scanning the scene before her eyes immediately settled on Naomi. Relief crossed her face almost instantly. Without rushing or creating unnecessary attention, Daniel walked towards Sergeant Mercer. Good morning, Sergeant. I am Deputy United States Marshal Daniel Ruiz. Linda introduced herself and extended her hand. Daniel accepted the greeting before asking one calm, direct question. Where is Judge Naomi Whitaker? Brandon instinctively looked toward Naomi before quickly looking back at Daniel, convinced there had to be some misunderstanding. Evelyn stepped forward with unmistakable recognition in her voice. Your Honor, we have been trying to reach you for nearly an hour. The roadside fell completely silent. Brandon's expression froze as he slowly turned toward the woman whose driver's license he had destroyed only minutes earlier. Before anyone could say another word, Daniel reached into his briefcase, removed a sealed federal identification portfolio, and prepared to present the official credentials that would leave absolutely no room for doubt. Deputy United States Marshal Daniel Ruiz opened the sealed leather portfolio with deliberate care, removing 2 official credentials before handing them first to Sergeant Linda Mercer. Linda examined the identification slowly, comparing the photograph, the federal seals, and the authentication numbers with the secure notifications still displayed on her patrol tablet. Every detail matched perfectly. She looked up at Naomi Whitaker, and her professional expression softened into one of immediate understanding. Your Honor, she said respectfully, I sincerely apologize for the circumstances that brought us here today. Naomi acknowledged the apology with a small nod. Sergeant, I appreciate your professionalism. Daniel then turned slightly toward Brandon Keller. Officer, you may review the credentials as well. Brandon accepted the identification with hands that no longer carried the confidence they had shown less than an hour earlier. His eyes moved from the official photograph to Naomi, standing only a few feet away. United States District Judge Naomi Elise Whitaker. The words seemed impossible to reconcile with the assumptions he had made only minutes before. He swallowed quietly before returning the credentials to Daniel without saying anything. Evelyn Brooks stepped beside Naomi with visible relief. Your Honor, everyone at the courthouse has been concerned. The morning calendar has already been adjusted while we attempted to locate you. Naomi offered an apologetic smile. I regret the delay. Circumstances changed unexpectedly. She did not look toward Brandon as she spoke. She simply stated the facts without accusation or sarcasm. That restraint made the silence surrounding the group even heavier. Linda carefully picked up the remaining pieces of Naomi's driver's license from the shoulder of the road and placed them inside a small evidence envelope. She understood immediately that preserving exactly what had occurred would be important for proper documentation. Brandon watched quietly as every action around him shifted from routine traffic enforcement to formal accountability. For the first time that morning, he realized that no one was interested in protecting appearances. Everyone was focused on preserving facts. Daniel looked toward Linda. Sergeant, thank you for maintaining the scene once dispatch notified you. That decision prevented additional complications. Linda nodded. Procedure exists for moments exactly like this. Brandon lowered his eyes briefly. He finally spoke, his voice noticeably quieter than before. Judge Whitaker, I made conclusions before completing verification. Naomi met his gaze calmly. Officer Keller, every person deserves to be seen before they are judged. That principle does not begin inside a courtroom. It begins during ordinary moments like this one. Her words carried no anger. They were spoken with the same steady tone she had used throughout the entire encounter. Brandon found himself unable to answer. The realization settled over him with greater weight than any reprimand could have delivered. Nearby, another patrol officer who had just arrived to assist quietly observed the exchange, recognizing that the lesson unfolding before him extended far beyond one traffic stop. Daniel carefully returned the credentials to the portfolio before speaking again. Judge Whitaker, transportation has been arranged whenever you are ready. Naomi nodded, but before taking a single step toward the government vehicle, she looked at Linda once more. Sergeant, I would appreciate one request. Of course, Your Honor. Please ensure that every report reflects exactly what happened today. Nothing more, nothing less. Linda answered without hesitation. You have my word. Daniel then glanced toward Brandon with a measured expression. Officer Keller, there is one additional matter you should be aware of. Brandon looked up uncertainly. Daniel continued calmly. The court security network automatically preserves incidents involving members of the federal judiciary. That includes any available body camera recordings, dispatch communications, and public video evidence. By this afternoon, every minute of this encounter will be reviewed through the appropriate federal and departmental channels. The morning breeze remained gentle, but Brandon suddenly understood that the most important conversation of his career had not even begun. Within an hour, the roadside encounter had become the subject of a formal chain of documentation rather than roadside speculation. Judge Naomi Whitaker departed with Deputy United States Marshal Daniel Ruiz and Court Security Director Evelyn Brooks, arriving at the courthouse with little fanfare and immediately informing the chief judge that she wanted every review to proceed through established procedures without special treatment. The integrity of the process matters more than the identity of the people involved, she said quietly before entering her delayed courtroom. Those words reached Daniel before the courtroom doors closed, and he silently appreciated that she had chosen principle over emotion. Meanwhile, Sergeant Linda Mercer returned to the precinct with Officer Brandon Keller following in a separate patrol vehicle. The drive back was unusually quiet. Brandon replayed every decision he had made that morning, recognizing that each conclusion had come before verification, each assumption had replaced patience, and every unnecessary choice had gradually created a problem that could have been avoided. As soon as they arrived, Linda instructed Brandon to secure his equipment and report directly to an interview room reserved for administrative reviews. There was no raised voice, no public humiliation, and no dramatic confrontation. Only procedure. Inside the department's professional standards office, technicians immediately began preserving every available record connected to the traffic stop. Dispatch recordings were archived. Computer inquiry logs were copied. The patrol vehicle's location history was secured. Most importantly, Brandon's body camera recording was downloaded without alteration. Midway through the preservation process, one of the technicians paused the playback after noticing a critical sequence. The video clearly showed that Naomi had complied with every instruction, answered every question calmly, and never resisted or attempted to conceal her identity. It also documented that the driver's license had not been electronically verified before it was damaged. The technician quietly marked the timestamp before continuing the review. At nearly the same moment, another investigator informed Sergeant Mercer that a citizen who had witnessed the traffic stop had voluntarily contacted the department and offered an unedited cell phone recording from across the roadway. Linda accepted the information immediately. "Request the original file," she instructed. "Maintain the complete chain of custody." Less than 30 minutes later, the citizen arrived and willingly transferred the untouched recording. The perspective was different from the body camera, but together the two videos presented a complete and remarkably consistent timeline. There was very little left to interpretation. Brandon sat alone in the interview room, staring quietly at the table in front of him. For the first time since becoming a police officer, he realized that accountability was not arriving because someone influential demanded it. It was arriving because facts had been carefully preserved from multiple independent sources. The truth required no embellishment. It simply existed. Linda entered the room carrying a folder that had grown noticeably thicker over the past hour. She placed it on the table, but did not open it. "Officer Keller," she said evenly, "this review is about conduct, procedure, and public trust. It is not about protecting reputations." Brandon nodded slowly. "I understand." Before Linda could continue, her department phone vibrated with an incoming call from the Office of Professional Responsibility. She answered, listened carefully for several moments, then thanked the caller. After ending the conversation, she looked directly at Brandon with the same calm professionalism she had shown throughout the day. "The department has received formal notice that the United States Marshals Service and the federal court have requested copies of all documentation. They also informed us that another piece of evidence has just been identified." Brandon looked up, confused. Linda closed the folder without revealing its contents. "It appears that a nearby business security camera captured the entire traffic stop from the moment your emergency lights were activated. The following morning, the department's administrative review moved forward with the precision expected of any professional standards investigation. Every recording had been cataloged, every dispatch transmission had been transcribed, and every digital record had been preserved under established evidence procedures. Sergeant Linda Mercer sat beside two investigators from the Office of Professional Responsibility as the synchronized videos played across multiple monitors. Brandon Keller watched silently from the opposite side of the room. No one interrupted the recordings. They simply allowed the events to unfold exactly as they had happened. The body camera captured every instruction, every response, and every missed opportunity to verify information before acting. The citizen's cell phone recording confirmed the same sequence from another angle. Finally, the nearby business security camera filled in the remaining moments, documenting the traffic stop from the instant Brandon activated his emergency lights until Deputy United States Marshal Daniel Ruiz arrived. Together, the recordings formed one uninterrupted timeline. There were no contradictions. There was no confusion. There were only facts. One investigator quietly paused the video after Naomi Whitaker calmly requested verification before assumptions. He replayed that brief exchange once more before making a note in the official report. Professional demeanor maintained throughout the encounter. Linda nodded slightly. That observation matched everything she had personally witnessed. Across town, Judge Naomi Whitaker completed her delayed court calendar with the same steady professionalism that had defined her conduct the previous day. During a brief break between hearings, Daniel Ruiz updated her on the progress of the administrative review. The evidence has been preserved from multiple independent sources, he explained. The process is moving exactly as it should. Naomi thanked him before asking a single question. Has anyone attempted to influence the review? Daniel answered without hesitation. No, Your Honor. Every agency involved understands that this matter must stand entirely on documented facts. Naomi offered a quiet smile. Then the system is working. Back at the police department, Brandon remained seated as the final recording ended. The silence inside the review room felt heavier than any formal accusation. He understood that what troubled everyone was not simply one decision. It was the pattern revealed by the timeline. Assumptions had consistently come before verification. Procedure had been bypassed when it should have guided every action. Brandon finally spoke. I cannot change what happened. Linda answered calmly. No one expects you to change the past. Accountability is about what happens after the facts become clear. Those words settled over the room with quiet authority. A few minutes later, an investigator entered carrying another folder that had just arrived from the federal courthouse. He placed it on the conference table and explained that it contained official scheduling records confirming precisely why Judge Whitaker had been traveling that morning, along with secure communication logs documenting every unsuccessful attempt to contact her during the traffic stop. The additional records aligned perfectly with every timestamp already collected by the department. The timeline was now complete from beginning to end. Brandon lowered his eyes as he realized there was no missing piece left to explain away. Every minute had been accounted for through independent documentation. As the meeting concluded, Linda escorted Brandon into the hallway. Before either of them could speak further, the chief of police approached with a composed expression. He carried a sealed envelope bearing the department's official insignia. Looking directly at Brandon, he said quietly, Officer Keller, this is formal notice that an internal disciplinary hearing has been scheduled. You will have the opportunity to respond under department policy. Brandon accepted the envelope without opening it. Then the chief turned toward Linda. There is one more development. Judge Whitaker has submitted a written statement to the review board, and according to federal officials, every member of the panel has already read the first paragraph. The disciplinary hearing took place 3 weeks later inside a quiet conference room at police headquarters. There were no television cameras waiting outside, no dramatic speeches, and no celebration of anyone's mistakes. The review board consisted of senior department officials, legal advisors, and professional standards personnel whose responsibility was not to deliver public spectacle, but to determine whether department policy had been followed. Every member had already reviewed the complete timeline, including dispatch recordings, body camera footage, the citizen's video, business security footage, computer access logs, and written reports. Facts had replaced speculation long before the hearing began. Brandon Keller entered the room wearing a dark business suit instead of his patrol uniform. He looked noticeably different from the confident officer who had stepped out of a patrol vehicle only weeks earlier. He listened quietly as investigators summarized the documented sequence of events, carefully explaining where established procedures had not been followed and how assumptions had been allowed to replace verification. When Brandon was invited to speak, he remained silent for several moments before finally saying, I believed experience was enough. I understand now that experience without discipline can become its own blind spot. No one interrupted him. Accountability, everyone in the room understood, required honesty more than excuses. Near the conclusion of the hearing, the chairperson opened the written statement submitted by Judge Naomi Whitaker. The room became completely still as the first paragraph was read aloud. I respectfully request that this matter be evaluated through the same objective standards applied to every member of law enforcement. My purpose is not to seek personal revenge. My purpose is to ensure that every citizen, regardless of appearance, receives the same patience and verification that our justice system promises before judgment is made. The statement continued by acknowledging Sergeant Linda Mercer's professionalism, Deputy United States Marshal Daniel Ruiz's careful handling of the situation, and every employee who had preserved the evidence without alteration. Judge Whitaker never asked for a particular disciplinary outcome. She simply reminded the board that public trust depended upon consistency rather than status. Her words shifted the tone of the hearing. The discussion no longer centered on one traffic stop. It focused on the responsibility carried by every badge and every public office. In the months that followed, the department introduced additional verification training, emphasizing that assumptions could never replace documented facts during any public encounter. Sergeant Mercer helped develop the updated instruction program, using the incident as an anonymous case study that reminded new officers to slow down, verify information, and treat every person with dignity from the very first moment of contact. Brandon accepted the department's final decision and continued participating in the required accountability process without public complaint. He understood that rebuilding trust, if it was possible at all, would require years of consistent conduct rather than a single apology. Judge Naomi Whitaker returned to her courtroom, where she continued serving the law exactly as she had before that ordinary Tuesday morning unexpectedly became anything but ordinary. She never spoke publicly about the encounter. She allowed the official record to speak for itself. Years later, those who studied the case rarely remembered the damaged driver's license. They remembered something far more important. They remembered that the strongest institutions are protected not by pride, but by people willing to let facts lead before assumptions. Because justice does not become meaningful when powerful people receive respect. Justice becomes meaningful when ordinary moments reveal that every person deserved that respect from the very beginning.